Hey everybody, David Cristello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Growing Your Firm podcast. Today's guest is Michael Frost. He's the co-founder and president of Heritage Family Offices, which is a multidisciplinary firm comprised of a law firm, CPA firm, RIA, and insurance. And the topic that we're going to talk about and really explore is like, how do you escape the CPA firm owner rat race? So we're going to talk about Michael's journey, lessons learned, and so much more. But first and foremost, Michael, thanks for jumping on the show.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, for people not familiar with the firm, give me a little bit more. What kind of clients do you work with? How big's the firm? Is it on premise? Is it hybrid? Is it remote? Give me a quick look at what the firm looks like.
Yeah, no, happy to. As you mentioned in your introductory comments, yeah, I'm one of the co-founding partners of Heritage Family Offices, as well as my business partner, Ralph Nelson, duly licensed as an attorney as well as a CPA. We co-founded the company almost a decade ago, so about 11 and a half years ago. And just as the name states, family office, our firm is 100% vertical. So there's no outsourcing. We operate a law firm, CPA firm, a wealth management firm, and an insurance company, all in-house. Collectively, amongst all disciplines, we've got a little over 45 employees, and we service affluent, ultra affluent, high income earners. And maybe later in the show, we'll talk about our partnership program. In 2018, we did package up and sell a big portion of our tax practice to really hyper focus in on clients that see a greater value in family office services. And just a little bit of a backstory, because I think it builds a little bit of credibility, especially to your audience that are CPAs of just kind of how we got here. But I think the timeline does a little bit of justice. I think a lot of entrepreneurs can probably relate to this. I don't think you build a successful company without falling on your face quite a few times. And so, yeah,
that's what I was wondering is how did you meet Ralph? It's huge trust factor because, you can't jump in and say, well, if Ralph isn't doing what he needs to do, I can handle the legal end of the practice, right? So, give us the backstory of how this, partnership came to be.
Yeah, no, it's a fun story that I like to tell. Prior to co-founding Heritage, I was an advisor. I guess by way of introduction of my background, I grew up in the wealth management industry. So Merrill Lynch, prior to that, Wells Fargo, combined between the two firms about 7 years. I had the typical referral relationship that I think most financial advisors have with other CPAs. And it kind of goes like this. I'll send referrals over to Ralph, the CPA. And because he has CPA behind his name, instantly the clients and prospects to him at the time trust him almost overnight. Clients are trained to trust the CPA as the most trusted advisor. And in turn, maybe Ralph would give me one referral back. And if he did, it was accompanied with 2 other business cards that said, go interview Michael, go interview a couple of financial advisors, and whomever you think is the best personality fit, you should go with them. And that's your typical advisor CPA relationship. Well, in 2011, Ralph was actually solicited via cold call by an insurance agent. He was a salesman, and he said, I'd like to come to your office and pitch something called a Section 79. We didn't endorse those plans then. We don't endorse them now. They've since become a listed transaction. But nevertheless, Ralph said, okay, sure, come to my office. Not an exaggerated story. The life insurance salesman shows up to Ralph's office. At the time, he was working at a small boutique tax practice. He was licensed as an attorney, but primarily practicing tax. A Ferrari drives up, takes up the first 2 parking spots, parking sideways, and walks through Ralph's glass double doors. And Ralph tells the story amazingly, but he says, it's when the light bulb went off. He said, this guy is driving a Ferrari, yet I've got all these credentials behind my name. What am I doing wrong? And so he gave the insurance salesman 20 minutes, left a life insurance illustration with him. At the time, we had that referral relationship. He he picked up the phone and said, Michael, can you look into this for me? I don't know what this is. And about that time, although I was insurance licensed, I don't think I'd ever sold a life insurance policy in my life. But he sent the policy. I did some research. Come to find out, it had a 6-figure commission attached to the life insurance policy. And although we didn't do any business with that gentleman, I should probably look him up and buy him a beer, because it's what sparked the relationship between Ralph and I. Now, we didn't propose that particular strategy to the plan, but what we did recognize is clients are trained to trust the CPA. I think Ralph's additional background of being an attorney gives us a little bit of an unfair advantage as well. But what we did learn is most of the business would come either through the CPA firm and the law firm, yet the more commoditized lines of services at that time, wealth management and insurance, although commoditized, were much more scalable and much more profitable. And so we spent about 6 months business planning, saying, how can we put these 4 disciplines together and bring them to the market? And that's where the relationship started. And so we left our independent practices. I left Merrill. Ralph left his boutique practices. We put our 4 licenses together, and we started to deliver a family office service to what we identified as the middle market. It was underserved. We didn't necessarily look at our competition and say, let's do exactly what those guys are doing because they're doing it successful, and let's just do it better. Instead, we looked at the marketplace and we said, what's missing? And that affluent business owner, and at that time, the bar was set a little bit lower for the type of clientele that we served, but that $5, $10, $15, $25 million client that had a lot of concentration in their business has the same types of complexities as the ultra affluent, but didn't have the ability to go across the street and get all services under one roof. And so in our first few years in practice, we're wildly successful. And it wasn't because Ralph was the smartest attorney and CPA out there, and vice versa. I definitely wasn't the best, financial advisor and insurance professional, but we brought something to the marketplace that at that time no one else was delivering that type of service, and that's really what kickstarted the firm and got it started.
I love it. One of those early years was growth, word of mouth. Did referrals? Did you bring any client? Like, was Ralph able to pull any clients over? Were you able to bring any clients over? Was it literally opening the doors and it was like 0 day 1? Let's go. We got to go get some money.
Yeah. So for me, I always joke and say Ralph got the short end of the straw because I brought almost nothing to the table. I was your typical struggling financial advisor, maxed out credit cards, begging my friends to show up to a free steak dinner so I could convince them into having me manage my portfolio. I mean, I say that loosely, but that's kind of what happens in the wealth management industry, especially back then, because the industry was so competitive and it's been commoditized. I brought very little to the table. Ralph brought a couple hundred tax clients, and that's really what seeded our firm. And so to answer your question about referrals, matter of fact, for some of the CPA firms that we consult to today, that's the first thing that we tell them. We do a lot of consulting for CPA firms to help them transform their existing tax practice to get them out of this rat race. Once you integrate outsourcing, automation, remove and get away from spending time on the commoditized service, the first thing we tell them is do not go get another client. You've got 1,000 clients that trust you. Let's just better serve them and get you better compensated for the advice that you're already giving them. And so that's exactly what we did with those 200 clients. And I can't take any credit for it. Ralph is the one because, again, they trusted Ralph, not me. Even though my licenses gave the firm other capabilities to serve the client, it was Ralph that went to his 200 clients that already trust him, that said, you've been coming to me for years for counsel on wealth management, or look at this insurance policy that someone provided me, and I've always referred you across the street. I'm now letting you know we've got the ability now to do all these services in house. Do you want to come in and have a discussion? We did that for 200 clients, and the success that we had was far exceeded anything that we ever planned for. We did not realize the amount of influence that Ralph and other CPAs have over the client's decision making. I think a lot of CPAs think that naturally this is just a conflict of interest. My clients don't want me involved in their wealth management, in the selection of an insurance product. We quickly found out that is the polar opposite. The clients want their most trusted advisor having a vested interest in what's going on in all of their affairs. And that was credit to Ralph just going to tell the story. From that, really, the services then just fell into place. And we did that for a couple of years. And then as most business owners do, you learn a way to mess up a good thing. And so we started.
We'll dig into the mess up, we'll call it, around 2014, 2015, just to play with the math a little bit. Okay, so Ralph brings 200 clients to, in from his prior firm. If you don't mind disclosing, like what was the revenue prior to you expanding service offering? Like a couple 100,000 a year, or 100,000, 500,000? Like, I don't know. Rough guesses would be fine.
Yeah, this is what really kind of blew our socks off. And this is where the light bulb goes on for other CPA firms, especially when you start comparing your billable hours to what the other disciplines can generate in the form of revenue. So take an average tax client that was a business owner, where we're filing both the business and the personal and providing some consulting. Maybe that client was paying Ralph $5,000 a year for those services back then.
Okay.
Ralph would bring that client in, that client that was only generating Ralph $5,000 on a reoccurring basis, and we would introduce the other services. We always start with holistic planning, which is simply just bringing in the client and interviewing them. Assets, liabilities, income sources, objectives. What's most important to you? What are we planning for? And that's where it would start, and it would open the door to the other services. Through the holistic planning, we would deliver, and we would unpack potentially other opportunities that Ralph wasn't servicing, like basic estate planning, corporate governance, what have you. So we start to add on to the relationship, and then through that one client that was paying Ralph $5,000, we had the opportunity to roll over maybe a $5 million retirement account, introduce some life insurance to maybe fund a buy-sell agreement, as well as to complement their estate plan. And now that client that was paying Ralph $5,000 is now paying us reoccurring on a regular basis $50,000.
Whoa.
It's a very common occurrence. So we've taken, again, not getting another client, but we've increased revenue tenfold on an existing client that already trusts Ralph. And that there are dozens and dozens of stories of that exact fact.
So Ralph brings over about, $1 million book of business. And then over the subsequent years, say right up until the mess up, which I don't even know what it is. So I'm excited to dig into it. Right. You were scaling up from about 1 million to at least healthy 7 figures, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe all the way up to 10 million. Like you sounded like you were trending aggressively in multi-healthy 7-figure and more profitable, better margin revenue than you would have otherwise if you stayed in tax.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Those first couple of years in practice, and your rough math is close. Ralph had a $600,000 or $700,000 practice at that time, and we grew it organically, just better servicing his existing clients to about $3.5, maybe $4 million of revenue. And back then, that's when our gross was our net. We almost had no overhead. It was basically Ralph, myself, an assistant, and we were just running hard. And so when all that's falling to the bottom line, for a couple of young guys, we're like, holy smokes, we figured this out. And then we messed it all up. And so we said, if all of the new business is coming through the CPA firm and the clients are trained to trust the CPA, let's go buy CPA firms. And so we did that. All of the success that we were having, all the savings that we accumulated as a result of our success, we said, let's put our pedal to the metal and double down. Let's go buy CPA firms. And so we did that.
And this was 2015, 2016?
Yeah, this was 2014.
2014, yeah.
That we made our first acquisition. We were also attracted to infrastructure at that time because I think all the CPAs that are potentially listening, the tax practice in isolation is a very time intensive industry, and it will drain your soul over time if you let it. And Ralph was there, so we needed some infrastructure. So we made our first purchase in Phoenix. About 7 or 8 employees, an $800,000 purchase. Back then, we were buying CPAs for about little over 1 times multiple of gross revenue. Since then, there's even been more compression in the CPA industry, and I've seen transactions take place for less than that. But nevertheless, that's what we purchased our first firm for, and we moved right on to the second purchase in 2000.
Now, just to clarify, when you say infrastructure, is that you wanted the headcount? You wanted, what does that mean, infrastructure, when you say that?
If you were to, although we were extremely profitable in 2013, 2014, if you were to come hang out in our office during tax season, it's not an exaggeration to say Ralph would literally prepare the return on the computer, hit the print button, and then review it on paper. And psychologically, that was him kind of like taking his hat, putting the hat on to be the preparer, putting his hat on to be the reviewer. And we had no real processes or procedures in place. It was us. And again, credit to Ralph, especially during tax season. It was just him. So we had no policies, no procedures, no operations, no infrastructure. We were a one man show on the tax side. And so
a quick question then, by extension of that. So you mentioned, Ralph brought a lot to the table. I know you're being humble, you brought a lot to the table too, but how did you think about structuring, especially with Ralph being a lawyer, that early partnership agreement, which is like, we think we're going to work really well together, but we don't know? Or was it like this is a marriage and we're going all in? Or do you have clauses of like, I can buy you out at this time for this reason, for this price? Or how did you kind of, maybe de-risk the partnership, if at all?
Yeah. So an introductory comment to that, and then I'll answer the question. This is where I also think a lot of other CPAs can relate to. Ralph desperately wanted an out. So he was running hard in tax seasons with credentials behind his name, watching guys driving up in Ferraris to his office. He wanted out. He's like, I am tired of working 70 and 80-hour work weeks, to not be an exaggeration, 70-hour work weeks for mediocre pay. He's like, there has to be a better way. When I came along, there was a little bit of luck. And not to latch onto your comment about myself being humble. If I'm being radically transparent, there was some luck involved. I got good timing. Ralph wanted the heck out of there, and so he just latched on to me as an out. And now, with that said, where we went into our partnership, and I'll tell you, even till today, we have not 100% solved for this. There are times right now, heading into extension season, is another reminder of this, that his butt is in the seat more than mine. That is a problem in the industry that we are passionate about solving for. We believe the CPA is the most trusted advisor. They should be compensated appropriately. And so we are passionately trying to solve for that. But what Ralph and I have had in common throughout the history of our relationship, which I truly believe has made us successful, and any CPA or advisor that's trying to work with one another, listen up. Don't enter into a relationship and never put yourself in a situation of pointing fingers. So we actually never even had anything contractually on paper, like you referenced there, David. We said, here's what Michael brings to the table. Here's what Ralph brings to the table. We recognized without my licenses, we've been blessed with a lot of cases that have put 6 figures in our pockets on an annual basis very regularly over the history of our career. it couldn't have been done without my licenses. Without Ralph in the room, we never even have a shot at the business. We don't even get the first meeting. Nevertheless, the client probably wouldn't engage us without Ralph in the room. Since day one, we said, let's never point fingers at one another. Let's just go 50-50 down the middle, no matter what happens. And even today, we've been living our life that way. And I've been in the trenches with him. I've been in those painful seasons that I know a lot of your audience can relate to. Psychologically, I went through, I grew up quickly professionally working alongside him, but it was very, very hard seeing him in the trenches. And because my technical ability didn't allow me to, I mean, I could bind a seat, when the tax return's done, I'll bind it up and get it out the door and track down signatures and go meet with clients. But a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Ralph, especially in those earlier years. And he never once said, this isn't fair. Why are you getting paid more than me when I'm doing most of the work? And it was Ralph's willingness to work through those that I think got us to where we are today.
Yeah, and it really speaks to it's a complementary partnership too, right? You mentioned Ralph wanted it out. If he started a firm without you, he'd be right back to kind of square one, right? Grinding away 200 clients, probably wanted to grow it to 300 clients, 400 clients, 500 clients. So this was a great complementary partnership almost day one. I think where I've seen mergers or partnerships go a little sideways is like they both are offering the same thing. You try to smash the two firms together and you don't really get any growth. You only get more confusion. And so it sounds like you guys really had a complementary relationship day one. So let's fast forward. You mentioned, you're in tax seasons 2014. Current process was, Ralph does he prepares it, prints it, does the return. It doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of systems, but you're going in acquisition mode. So let's unpack that year. You purchased a firm for $800K, 7 to 8 people. At that time, was it still kind of like no process, no infrastructure, or were you hoping this acquisition brought some systems to your tax practice?
It did, yeah. So we still had really no formal processes, procedures. It was just Ralph doing what he did. Our first acquisition did give us that. In fact, it was a great practice. The theory around acquiring CPA firms is if we could buy the CPA firms, we could just buy the client's trust, and it should transfer over as easy as that. And so we used up all of our cash and then took on a significant amount of debt, and we bought two firms back to back. So we bought that first firm for 8 people, gave us infrastructure. We went through one tax season, and then we immediately bought the next firm, which was significantly larger. On paper, our revenues would justify an acquisition. Because of our 4 disciplines and our profitability, we went and acquired a little over a $2 million purchase at about almost 30 employees. And so on paper, it kind of made economic sense. But we learned really quickly that, we were a 10-person firm acquiring a firm that had 30 people that had been in business for 35 years, doing the same thing the same way for a very long time. And even though our financials may justify the acquisition, from a culture and a people standpoint, it was the biggest professional mistake I've ever made if you were to look at it on paper. That being said, I think if you were to ask Ralph and I don't think we would change it. We drained our pocketbooks. I took years off my life. I drained my soul. And we turned into the CPA firm that we consult to today. Although we were structured as a family office, we were reactive, not proactive. We were selling something to a client that we couldn't actually deliver on. And we ended up hostage to our own CPA firm. We had about just shy of 3,000 clients. And all we were doing was just trying to keep our head above water to service those tax clients. And for every family office client that I would find the time to win the business, I was losing 2 out the back door.
Mm.
We were running for us at the time a pretty decent size CPA firm. And one thing about running a multifamily office is it is very capital intensive. So you can't just take the pro formas of a traditional CPA firm and the profit margins of that firm to run a family office. Matter of fact, fast forward to today, it needs to be more of the opposite. You need to really rely on the profit margins of the other disciplines so that you can properly serve and staff a good quality CPA firm. And so we fell hard on our face. We literally drained, not an exaggeration. I think from the outside looking in, there were other professionals saying, wow, look at these guys. They figured it out. This is pretty sexy. Behind closed doors, Ralph and I literally were shedding tears at times. At the worst point, the word bankruptcy came up a few times. What did we get ourselves into? And we knew we had something extremely special, but we had to do something drastic to just get our lives back, because there's no way that we were going to do this for the rest of our lives. And so we packaged up everything that we acquired and we put it on the market for sale. And in 2018, we sold our tax practice. Essentially, everything that we acquired, we sold it, and not for a profit. We, give or take, broke even and gave up 3.5, 4 years of our life. Those hard, painful years, I think, is the testimony to what is giving us the success today, because everything that we learned at that time, we're now applying it forward, and it grew us professionally faster than anything that we could have ever experienced. You can't read it in a textbook. And that, I mean, it's cliche. I mean, you learn the most from your failures, but I don't give those painful years back. I will never make the types of mistakes that I made back then now. And it gives us some credibility when we sit in front of CPA firms and I see the pain in their eyes. And that's not an exaggeration. You see the pain in their eyes. I've had CPAs cry to me saying, I've done this for 25 years. Like, I want to actually be present with my family and my grandkids. I don't want to do this anymore. When I share that story, it gives us some credibility to say, I hear you. Yeah, we've been there, and you can fix this, and let us show you how. And it's those painful years that I think even allows CPAs us to step in their office and show them how.
So lot to unpack there. I did want to emphasize a point that I think it is, or it can be, really dangerous to look at your competition. So firms looking at you during this time and thinking, oh, they figured something out. Look at them buying it up, buying this great revenue, buying these practices. They're growing. Headcount's growing. You probably didn't know your revenues and margins, obviously the internal struggles. And then they think, you know what? I'm going to the bank. I'm getting a loan. I'm putting down a deposit. I'm going into M&A. And it's so dangerous because you end up copying. You don't know if you're copying somebody's success or their mistakes, right? Like that is, and it's just as challenging in software as it is in services, as it is in anything else. So I think that's just a really, really critical point. Now, I guess a couple questions here to unpack that period. So you started buying 2014, you let it go in 2018. What was the trigger in end of 2017, 2018 that said, hey, let's sell it, right? That had to be a hard decision to come to, but what really led you to kind of reach that point? Because I think that simplification is really important for firm owners, but it's really, really hard to kind of let go, especially for you all, essentially pouring everything you have into trying to make these acquisitions work.
Yeah, it was a couple of things. Similar to when the good timing and when I met Ralph as my business partner, we hit professional rock bottom. I mean, literal professional rock bottom. And so we had we had no choice. We both have young families, and at that time, I mean, babies, and um, that season of life is just challenging. And then you pour this on top of it. We were literal, rock bottom, um, and draining the pocketbooks to zeros is not an exaggeration. So we had no choice. We had to make a change. Second to that, during that time, Ralph and I built a decent reputation amongst the CPA community. So we would have conventions invite us to their symposium to tell our story. It was unique. This isn't brand new to the industry. I mean, advisors have been told by their industry that you got to go partner with CPA firms. CPA firms have been told you've got to bring in wealth management. You've got to bring in other services. As law firms have been told the same. Insurance companies have been totally commoditized. So none of this is new. We just were able to make it work. And so we would go tell our story, and similar to today. And we would step off the stage, and there'd be a line of 50 CPAs, literally just all lined up, wanting to ask Ralph and I questions. I want to do this. How did you do this? I've always wanted to do this. Show me how, show me how, show me how. We've always been this way. We believe there's not much intellectual property left in our industry. And so we were always an opus book. We were like, and we knew how difficult and challenging it was. So we would just tell them, like, this is how you do it. Go do it. And then we'd get calls later like, yeah, it's not really working. And so we, at that time, hitting professional rock bottom, and us going through those years of actually figuring it out. We knew how to do it, but we were hostage to our own CPA firm. We needed the time to actually go do it. So we said, if we could sell our tax practice, free up the capacity, we could get other CPA firms to go through the same transformation and not make the same mistakes that we did. And so it was the combination of those two things that said it was time. Let's do it.
Yeah, and I think a really important call out here is like you in the early days you had the formula. Yeah, you didn't have the systems, you didn't have the infrastructure, but you had a service market fit, like you alluded to. You had a unique offering that allowed you to grow quickly, hyper profitably, right? So I think firms sometimes get in the trap of like, I'm not really getting the margins I want, not really getting the growth around, and they almost prematurely try to scale when they haven't really found their ideal client, their ideal mix. So, one of the biggest benefits, aside from your really, it sounds like strong relationship with Ralph, the fact that you both could be on the same page and get through this together in the trenches, was saying, there is something here. There is that gold. We found that gold. Remember that gold? It was there 4 years ago. It was there 5 years ago. That is still there, right? And I think like that's really important as you're kind of going through these changes versus firms that maybe try to grow quickly and they're like, now they don't know what to do because they never found that service market fit or that great client or that great mix. So I think it was really interesting how you're able to kind of go back to that formula that was so successful and then help other people do the same. Well, random question, Mike. I'm going to throw it out there. You obviously absorb a lot of information. You sound like you go to a lot of conferences. Before we wrap up and give folks a way to reach out to you, what's been one book, podcast, website, something that's really resonated with you this year that you hope some of the listeners would digest?
Yeah, actually, as a firm, we've got kind of a library of foundational books that we encourage some of our new employees to read. And probably a lot of your audience has read this, but one of the earlier books that I read was Good to Great. Focusing in on not necessarily the companies that failed compared to the companies that succeeded. If you read through that book, it studies what separates the companies that are really good from the companies that are really great in those industries, and what are the commonalities of those really great companies that sets them apart from really good companies. It's easy to measure, well, this company succeeded and this company failed, and let me tell you why. it goes deeply into those companies, and some of the material from that book are now guiding principles for our firm. We will actually make business decision through the lens of those guiding principles, and if it breaks one of those guiding principles, we actually won't do it.
I love it. I love it. Well, if somebody wants to reach out, say thank you for coming on, learn a little bit more about what you're up to and what you do, or how you help CPA firms or tax practices, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, you can just go to our website. It's www.heritagefo, like family office, heritagefo.com. All of our contact information is on there. And you can reach me through there.
All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, if you're listening to today's interview, you couldn't jot everything down. We're going to do a full write-up. We're going to link up some of the resources at jetpackworkflow.com/blog. That's jetpackworkflow.com/blog. If you enjoyed this interview, help leave a 5-star review. If you really love this interview, really resonated with you, really sparked something, share it with a fellow firm owner that maybe needed to hear some of the information we went through today. Michael, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Ed.